So let's see what's happening with this one. We apparently are not finding a title. So the H1 refers to our title. It's line 66, okay? So it's this line that's breaking, which is get title, which is very strange. I'm going to check the URL. And apparently it's this URL here, okay? I'm going to go to my browser and see what's happening here. Okay, see, we're being redirected. This recipe requested is a duplicate of recipe whatever it is, so we're actually being redirected. So that recipe really doesn't exist. Okay, so what we can do is, let's go back and paste let's go to the network tab. I want to show you guys a cool trick. Let's go to the network tab. So I right-clicked, hit inspect element to open up our console, and I clicked on network, and I'm going to paste in the same URL. Okay, and here we see this is the response we get from the server. Okay, and if you see, the status code is the 301, so this is a permanent redirect. Okay, so we can use this to actually solve that error, because this redirect error, it's not really that we have a bug, but we haven't accounted for this case again. So we can say if response dot status code is greater than or equal to 300, so we know that all of these are errors. So 300s are redirects, 400s are client-side errors, and 500s are server-side errors. So we know that any of these will be bad for us. So we're just, actually, sorry, this should be less than 300. Okay. So we know that anything over 300 is bad for us, so we're just, not going to do anything in that case. So let's go back to our logs and see what's happening here. And I'm just going to wait a couple of more minutes to see if our queue... Okay, so let's refresh our queue, and we see that we still have 569 items in our queue. Okay, and this includes all of the items that had a bug and were reinserted into the queue after failing. Okay, so those are retries. So this includes all of the retries. So I'm just going to wait and see if this drops to 0. If it drops to 0, I know I have no more bugs. And if it doesn't, then I'll pay attention to my logs and see what's happening, okay? Okay, so what I have done is I've left the queue to actually go ahead and finish. And what I'm left in the queue is still with the same error that we apparently fixed, okay, with the status code. So I'm getting the same error when the title doesn't exist, and this is because we have a redirect. And what I've done is I've actually go ahead and printed out the status code, and for some reason, instead of giving us a 301, it's giving us back a 200. So this is the cause of the problem, why our fix doesn't work, okay? So I printed out the URL and then the response to status code. And then to figure out a way of how to solve this, I went ahead and went to the documentation of Google App Engine for the URL fetch library, which is the one we're using, and I saw this interesting property, final URL. So this is the actual URL whose request returned in this response. Only present if the fetch followed HTTP redirects. Okay, so apparently we are following HTTP redirects. This is maybe why we are getting a 200. Anyway, I set out to print this out, and let's see what we get in our console. Here we see that this is the final URL. Okay, so what we can do is we can test whether this, we can test whether this is present, because it says in the documentation that it's only present if the fetch URL followed HTTP redirects. So we can test if this is present, and if it is, we can just ignore this, okay, this recipe. So let's go ahead and implement that. If response.final URL, okay, and we can say if it's not present, so we want to store the entire recipe, okay? So let's go ahead and just delete all of that and see if we're still getting the error. Okay, and now we see we're not getting an error. So the worker is actually ignoring all of these files, and let's go to our queue and see if the queue is going down. Okay, we have 18, 17 recipes left, 15, so on and so forth. So this was the last error, and I know it was the last error because I left the queue to finish up until it returned all the time errors, okay, and it was retrying and all that, okay. So now I know there's no errors because these files are, these cases are being handled, and we're going to end up with no items in the queue, okay. So we finished, we have no items in the queue. So like that, I know that our parser is already, you know, pretty robust.